Okay, so last time we were looking at lines where black plays e5, knight c6, and g6. And so in those lines, black was putting his bishop on the g7 square. Okay, so now we're going to look at some lines where black chooses to develop his bishop along this diagonal, the f8 to a3 diagonal. Okay, so first thing we're going to look at is the Grand Prix reversed. So this is going to look familiar to those of you who play the Sicilian, because it's exactly a Grand Prix reversed. So knight f6, d3, and now there are two main ideas for black: bishop c5 and bishop b4. Same idea as in the Grand Prix with white. After the moves e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, f4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7. There are two moves, bishop b5 and bishop c4. So same idea here. Okay, so there's bishop c5, and there's bishop b4. Okay, notice that if black plays something like g6, then after e4, it ends up transposing to what we've already seen. After bishop g7, knight g2. And this will transpose after d6. You see? Transposed. Another potential thing black can do is to play d6. And then if e4, again, g6 will transpose to the same thing that we just showed you. Yeah, again, transposing. But there's one additional thing black can try here, which is to play after e4, this move, f takes e4. And here you can recapture with either the knight or the pawn. Let's see what we take with the pawn. And knight d4, knight g2, and c5. So black's trying to get this knight firmly rooted on d4. So as white, we're just going to kind of ignore it. And notice that black can never really move this knight away because it exposes this d6 pawn, which is backwards. So we just play around it. So castling bishop e7, f4, castle, h3 to stop knight g4 ideas, and bishop g4 as well. Bishop d7, g4, bishop c6, and knight g3. So this is another common idea in this opening, is to play g4 to give your knight this g3 outpost. So when black has a knight on d4, oftentimes we kind of ignore it and move our knights around this knight. So this knight is on a good outpost, but it doesn't really attack anything. And white has some kingside play by pushing his f and g pawns. And again, notice that if black removes this pawn and captures on f4, then we can play knight e2 and threaten to take on d4 because it's only defended once now instead of twice. Okay, so instead, let's see what happens if he plays bishop c5. Oh, okay. What happens if he takes the knight? Okay, yeah, I'll show that. Okay. So notice, okay, I'm going to not do it right away, but say after here, for example. So say he plays knight takes knight here. So the thing is, he's exchanging off his best piece for like our worst piece. So just in terms of, you know, piece placements, it can't be a good trade. But now we can just kind of build up on this pawn. We can play rook d1, play bishop e3. We can potentially play a3 and b4, or we can just continue a kingside attack. But in any case, it's not so much that we're actually going to be able to win this pawn by force, but it's more that just black will have to worry about it constantly, and it allows us to do other things. So I mean, by putting a knight on d4, black is not intending ever to take this knight, because again, it's his best piece, and this our knight is our worst piece. So we kind of play around it, and this knight just kind of sits there. Okay. So again, let's go back to bishop c5. Okay, so here we kind of deviate from the Botvinnik a little bit because the bishop is putting some pressure on this diagonal. So what we kind of want to do is eliminate its squares a little bit. So we play this move e3 instead of e4. So normally in the Botvinnik we would play e4 here, but that's not the right idea when this bishop develops to c5. So here black can do a couple of things. The more normal move would be to castle, and then knight ge2, queen e8. So this is a common idea in the Grand Prix, to get the queen out to h5. Castle, d6. And then notice part of the reason we play e3 is so we can play this move d4. Then after bishop b6, now we can get the advantage of the two bishops by playing this move knight to a4. So after bishop d7, now b3. So now notice that we play this move e3. We want to develop the bishop along this diagonal and put pressure on this pawn on e5. Knight d8. Knight takes b6. A takes b6. Knight c3. Bishop c6. d5. Bishop d7. f4. Again, trying to rip open this diagonal. Knight f7. a4. Queen e7. And this move, rook a2. Strong move, getting ready to transfer the rook to e2, anticipating that this file might open up in the near future. So after h6, rook e2, rook a e8. Now white opens the file by force with e4. And after e takes f4, e takes f5, queen d8, rook takes f4, white won a pawn, and is better, because this pawn on f5 is really cramping black's position. So you see white has tons of space, and his pieces are better. Notice black's pieces are all huddled on the back couple of rows. So this is very good for white. Okay, so that's one way it can happen, but a move that's a little bit more combative rather than castling is to play f4. So this is involving a pawn sacrifice, but the idea is to give this bishop some more scope. Okay, so there's actually a couple things white can do here. One is to take the pawn with the e-pawn, but I'll show you something else white can do. So normally as white, when white plays this move f5, so imagine the colors reversed in a Sicilian Grand Prix, the normal move here is to actually play knight ge7, or in this case knight ge2. And just kind of ignore it, and then just castle and get safe. So I'll show you what happens on this move, which is also reasonable. So black usually takes on e3, white takes on e3, d6, and again we play this move d4. And after bishop b6, we have this cute idea that is also similar in the Grand Prix for black, is this move b4, which transposes into a line of the Grand Prix, except white's up a tempo. And this is actually a really good line for black, and we're up a tempo, so how can it be bad for us? So the point is, after knight takes b4, queen a4 check forks the knight and the king, and then if knight c6, then d5 wins a piece, because the knight's pinned. So it's a way to kind of gain space on the queen side through use of tactics. And now we're threatening a move like c5, which traps the bishop. And if the bishop's out of the game, we're basically up a piece. So even if you play something like a6 after c5, bishop a7, yeah, so this is just not good for black. Okay, so for example, if e takes d4, castle, simply bishop takes c6, and c5, and the bishop's trapped. Okay, but I'll show you what happens if you take. So ef4. And so the point here is black wants to just develop quickly. So obviously black won't recapture because it just gets our bishop out, but he plays d6. Okay. So now white's slightly behind in development. White only has 2 pieces out, black has 3. So white should rush to kind of try to equalize that. So knight ge2, castle. And here, knight e4 makes sense to kind of try to trade pieces. When you're up material, trading is always good. Especially if you're behind in development, trading is good because it gets rid of your opponent's more active pieces. But h3 makes a lot of sense too. Keep pieces out of g4. So after queen e8, now knight e4, ef4, bishop f4, knight e4, and here just after bishop takes e4, white's just up a pawn, and black doesn't really have much compensation. It's even very possible that white could castle queenside here. So if he castles kingside, this h3 pawn might become loose. But here, white should just be better. Okay, so that's that line. Okay, let's look at the other potential square for the bishop, which is after d3, black can play this move bishop to b4. Okay, so black's intention here is to definitely take on c3, and then he's going to put his pawns on dark squares, and then try to play this move castle queen e8 and queen h5 and generate some attacking chances on the king. So the first order of business is to make sure that we defend this knight so that we don't have to take back with a pawn, because it kind of ruins a bit of our momentum if we have these double pawns. It's hard for us to make good pawn breaks. So like, you know, if we take and then play d4, he can always play just d6, and we never really want to take this e5 pawn because it isolates both these pawns on c3 and c4. And if we play d5, it locks up the position and helps black generate a kingside attack. So we want to try to keep our pawns together. So we play the move bishop to d2. It looks a bit passive, but this bishop is going to have to waste time moving around once we kick it around a bit. So castle. Now we're going to develop some knight f3. So notice now we don't play e3 here because it's kind of a waste of a move. So we just develop the knight to its natural square. But again, we're not going to be really getting a Botvinnik type setup. So knight f3, d6. So if black tries like say e4 for example, then we can just take, and simply rook c1. Again, we want to defend this knight, right? Because he's starting to play knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, and again ruin our pawn structure. Okay, so rook c1. I'm going to answer your question in a second, but let me just run through this line. So d6, and then castle, take with the bishop, bishop e6, knight d4, bishop d7. And here, white played this cute move, bishop e1, which keeps the two bishops, and also white has a advantage in the structure. This f5 move's a little weird, so e6 is a bit of a soft spot for black, and white's position's compact, so white's probably slightly better here. Okay, so yeah, let me get to your question now. So you asked, can white play queen c2 here? And the answer is not really. Problem with queen c2 is I can play knight d4, and now your queen is stuck. So your queen would have to go someplace awkward, and this knight is well posted on d4. So if your queen goes back to d1, now I can take on c3. Yeah. No, but feel free to keep asking questions because that's how you learn. Okay. So let me go back to the main line now. Okay, so which is bishop d2, and now castle knight f3. Okay, now d6. Okay, so he's just trying to get his bishop out on c8. So we castle. And now black realizes that this bishop's going to get chased around a bit. So he plays this move a6. So it looks a little weird, but the idea is he wants to get a square on a7 to retreat his bishop to. Because on a7, the bishop will actually exert a lot of influence on this diagonal. Whereas if he didn't do that, I could play a3, bishop a5, b4, bishop b6, and knight a4, and then get the advantage of the two bishops. And then play would develop similarly to how I showed you with after knight takes b6, a takes b6, we would just play bishop c3, d4, and start breaking through in the center. So I'll just show you an example of how that might work if he didn't play a6. So say he plays something like h6. Now a3, So rather than letting white do that whole maneuver, black just decides to take immediately. Okay, so queen e8 again. b4, gaining queenside space. b5. And now e3. Then after bishop h3. So black is trying to get some sort of attack brewing here, but now white has this very clever move, knight takes e5. So white has already won a pawn because he took on f4. This is a second pawn. And now he's going to win a third pawn when, after black recaptures this piece, he's going to win a third pawn on e5. So he's sacrificing a piece for 3 pawns, but notice that it basically forces a trade of queens, and the attack will be stone dead, and white's pawns are going to be absolute menace. So bishop g2, queen h5, knight h5, king g2, de5, fe5, g5, so trying to stop f4, but d4, c6, d5, rook c8, and notice how white's pawns more than compensate for the piece. Because if you notice, what's black's extra piece? Okay, it's either this knight on d8 or this knight on h5. This knight on h5 is trapped. It can only go back to g7. This knight on d8 is trapped and only can go to f7. So white's definitely better here. So it's a nice little positional sacrifice, but these pawns are worth more than the piece for sure. Yeah, exactly. So it took some foresight to see this, but so for example, after bc e6, white's just winning because e7 is threatened. Okay, so that's a little trick. I'll show you a couple of examples of what black can try to do. So say black tries to play this move a5. So the idea now is after a3, bishop c5, there's no b4. Okay, but the problem with a5 is that it makes this square b5 accessible for white's pieces. And also kind of loosens up the queen side a little bit. So simply just rook c1, king h8. Now this move knight d5, another common idea. Again, if knight takes, pawn takes, we get pressure on the c-file. And now notice this b6 square is weakened because of a5. So bishop e6, bishop g5, knight e7, a3, take, bishop c5, and d4. And this must be good for white. We have open c-file to get pressure on, and this pawn on d5 is actually quite strong. It's chess position trainer Spinal Tap. CPT. Okay. So that's that one. So you guys get the idea. Okay, so now let's look at what happens when black plays the move a6. So a6, and now if we try this a3, bishop a5, b4, or sorry, a3, bishop c5, b4, again, the bishop would have this square a7 to retreat to. So it gains some queenside space, but doesn't really accomplish what we want it to accomplish. So we got to try something else. And what we try is this move knight d5. So again, if black takes, we get this strong pawn on d5 and this open c-file to attack the c7 pawn. So black captures on d2. Now we recapture with a knight, because the queen is probably better served on d1 because it can come to b3, and the bishop can now look at this knight on d5. Okay, so knight e7, b4, gaining space. Okay, so here black should probably play c6 and chase the knight away himself. Instead he actually took, and the problem with taking is that now after pawn, oh sorry, he actually took with the other knight. Should probably be more aware of that. Okay, so he took with the other knight. And now the problem is white has a very clear plan, which is simply just pile up on the c-pawn. So I'll just show you how that can happen. Bishop d7, queen b3, queen e8, rook ac1, simply threatening to win the pawn, rook c8. And, you know, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that doubling on this pawn would be good. So simply rook c3. So notice if rook c2, then bishop a4 would be a little awkward, but simply rook c3, and now we're just starting to play rook fc1, and not much black can do. So black tries to kind of gum up the works, but rook fc1, queen h5, bishop f3, so to prevent queen takes e2. queen h6, and now simply queen b2, knight e8, and this move d4. And now black's position is slowly crumbling. If he takes on d4, rook takes c7, queen takes d4 is coming, and well, sorry, after e takes d4, rook moves, probably to c4, and then rook takes d4 is coming, and then this rook infiltrates on the e file. So rook c4, rook d4, rook e4, and then rook e7. And again, black's pieces look very sad, particularly the knight on e8. And there's no attack here. The other thing that black can try is if black tries bishop g4 here, then again we can simply take, knight g4. And now, an important move here, because black is threatening to play rook takes f3 and queen h2 check and queen takes f2 mate. So you have to defend the second rank, but this move queen c2 fits the bill. Because now if rook takes f3, pawn takes, queen h2, simply king f1, and now the queen defends this square, and black has nothing. And this rook is marauding. Okay, so that's the Grand Prix. Not super common, because I mean the Grand Prix isn't really that great for white, even up a tempo, so playing it as black down a tempo can't be the best. But there are a couple of tricks to know there. Okay, so now let's look at more of the main stuff, which is what happens after c4, e5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, knight c6, knight c3, and now bishop c5. Okay, so this is the three knights, so called because there are three knights developed. Okay, so here bishop c5. So a lot of the same things that we saw with the previous variation are going to kind of apply here. We're often going to plant a knight on d5. We're potentially going to play e3 in a lot of these variations. So here, it seems natural that we want to play e3 here. But it actually has a hidden problem, which I'll show you. So if e3, the problem is we weaken the square d3, and black can actually take advantage of it, sort of, by playing this immediate d5. So this is a typical idea in Sicilians as well, but the point is, after pawn takes, black has knight b4. And so he's forking this knight d3 check, which would be annoying, and he's also forking to just simply take this pawn back. And so after defending against this, move, knight d3, somehow black can simply recapture on d5 and black is fine. And notice there's a little trap here. If white plays d4, for example, take, black can actually simply take on d4. And this bishop is taboo because if queen takes bishop, then knight c2 forks every single piece, the rook, the king, and the queen. So it's a common trap that occurs in this type of position. So the move e3 opens up this possibility. So the right move in this position is actually a little bit of a strange move, but it's this move a3. So the idea of this move a3 is really trying to limit this bishop's scope. We're always potentially threatening an idea of playing b4 and c5, trying to trap the bishop. So black does best to kind of give this bishop a home. a6. So now he can go to a7 if we attack it. And notice this move a3 stops knight b4. So now black can't play, like, say, d5, for example, because if take, there's no knight b4, because the pawn stops it. If black tries something else, say, like, a5, now we play e3. castle, knight g2, rook e8, castle, d6, and now we simply play d3, bishop f5. Cute little trap, by the way, is if bishop g4, h3, and bishop e6, d4 wins material, because we're threatening this bishop and then we're threatening to play d5 next move. So that's a cute little trap. But instead, if bishop f5, h3, bishop a7, king h2, queen d7, e4, bishop g6. Okay, starting to take here potentially. Okay, so he gets rid of this bishop before it gets trapped. And now we ruin black's pawn structure. And after queen c3, knight g8, knight g3, this looks very, very, very nice for white. This bishop is doing great, but it's kind of a ghost bishop, just sniping at air. And black's king side is completely ruined. Okay, so let's look at one more thing. Just say black castles here. Then after e3, a6, it transposes back into the main line, which we'll go to in a second. But say if black plays like rook e8, knight g2, and like bishop f8, trying to just reroute. But now white's wasted, or black's wasted a lot of time. So after castling followed by d4, this should just be good for white. Okay, so let's go back to the main line, which is this move a6, again giving this bishop a retreat. So again, we're going to want to play this move e3 to blunt the bishop, and also we want to develop our knight to e2, and we want to castle. So e3, castle, knight to e2. Okay. So the reason we develop this knight to e2 as opposed to f3 is that, one, if this bishop ever comes to g4, we can always break the pin with f3 if we need to. And two, we have this option to play f4, f5, and our pawn won't be blocked by this knight. So I think this e2 square is more flexible than f3. And so in order to play this knight to e2, we'd have to play e3. So that's why we play, that's part of the reason why we play e3, rather than just playing like knight f3 right away and then castling. Okay. So rook e8. D6 and just castle. Bishop a7. And now an interesting idea would be f4 here. So the idea is you want to play f5, h3, g4, and knight g3. And it prepares a kingside attack. So this is an interesting thing. Is e4 a threat? For whom? I mean, e4 hangs upon pretty much every move, right? Oh, well, you'll see. But no, it's never going to be a threat, because after rook e8, we play d3. Yeah. So, but I'll make a point for you. So if castling is possible, and if e4 here, there's a common idea in this type of thing, which is, well, you can do actually two things here. You can play d4 with the idea if en passant you have knight f4, and then you just want to take back on d3, which is good. But you actually also have the opportunity to just play in this position. Queen c2. So you're attacking this the third time. Only way to defend it is queen e7. Now knight d5. Knight takes, pawn takes, knight d8. And then this queen is overloaded. So you can take on e4, take on e4, take on c5. And this should be good for white. It's a little risky because your light squares are a bit compromised, but this knight should be able to kind of hold the fort until you can, I mean, you can always play f3 too. Notice that that's a move that's available. So white should be better. I mean, he's just up a pawn. And if he can trade queens, it's pretty much over. Okay. Yeah, I know, but you can play queen d4. And then, like I said, you know, you can play knight d4, f3, or queen b4 even. Yeah, but that's never going to happen, so it's fine. But like I said, if you don't like the looks of this and you feel it's too dangerous, like I said, you can just play d4 and then knight f4 like I showed you. Okay, but anyway, this is not something you even have to go into ever, because you can just play d3. Oops. So after rook e8, you can just play d3, which is actually the most flexible. And now again, e4 is never a problem. But if you do get into a position where they play e4, you have a couple of options. Okay, so d6, castle, and bishop a7. Okay. So now all the pieces are kind of developed. So the question is, what should white do here? And the answer is that white wants to fianchetto this bishop, because he doesn't really have much prospects on this diagonal. So you might as well gain some space, b4. So the point is we want to play bishop b2, and we also want to gain some space. So here, bishop f5. Okay. So bishop e2 is certainly possible, but perhaps better might be h3 first, just to keep pieces out of g4. And then maybe you can even try f4, trying to exploit the fact this bishop is on f5. So like, for example, h3, h6, bishop e2, queen d7, king h2, rook a d8, rook c1, queen c8, knight d5, knight d5, e d5, or c5, and then e4 and f4, and then d4. And again, white's position is probably preferable. This knight is actually trapped. This rook has one legal move. This rook has one legal move. This queen has 3 moves. This bishop has 2 moves. This bishop has 3 moves. I mean, combined, black has like 12 moves. So white's just doing quite well here. No, this is not theory, but I show you guys sample games so you guys get a flavor of what white's trying to do. But okay. So let's say white plays bishop b2 right away. Queen d7. So now h3 is not possible. Whoops. So now h3 is not possible, which is why maybe h3 is slightly more accurate, but again, this is okay too. But same idea. So knight d5, knight d5, cd5. Okay, so again, same ideas as before. We're going to get a rook to the c file. We're going to play d4. Capture. Capture. Okay, so we take on h3. Get a knight on e4. And white's slightly better. Probably play a move like queen f3 next, maybe. Well, like I said, watch out for maybe knight g5 first. Maybe even queen b3. But yeah, if you play that move h3 first, maybe you can avoid some of this stuff. So that's how to play against bishop c5. Now let's look at the other bishop move, which is this one. Okay, so bishop b4. Okay. So this is actually a really critical variation if white had played knight f3 instead of bishop g2. And it's actually a super popular variation, but since we've played bishop g2 and we haven't developed this knight yet, we actually have an additional possibility here, which is to play this move knight d5 immediately. And this is similar to what happens in the Sicilian. So notice that all these positions are basically reverse Sicilians in a way. Okay. So black's best move is probably just to play bishop c5. And again, these positions will just be very similar to the ones we just looked at, except the only difference is this knight's on c3 in the bishop c5 lines, and here it's on d5, which I don't see what the difference is, but I'll show you what happens if he does some other stuff. So knight d5, cd5, knight e7, and now a strong move, knight f3. So d6 is impossible because queen a4 just wins a piece. And if bishop d6, then e4 and d4 are very strong. So if e4 here right away, then knight g5, f5, castle, knight takes d5, if h6 by the way, then queen a4, with a very strong threat of knight to e6. You guys notice that one? So his pawn is pinned, so his queen is actually trapped, so he'd have to take the knight on g5. And then you take on b4, and it's good for you. And also, if knight takes d5 here, then knight takes e4 is very strong. Because after take, he can... Okay. So knight takes d5. And here, we're down a pawn, but after this move d3, we regain our pawn. And we're better. Because again, our development is just much better than black's. Look at this guy, look at this guy. And most importantly, look at his king, not castled yet. And this diagonal is open, so queen b3 is always a danger. So white's just better here. Okay, so that's knight takes d5, not to be recommended. Another potential possibility is if black plays a5. And here, anything can be done, really. I mean, you can play e3 again and knight ge2. Knight f3 is also possible here now. Castle, castle. Rook e8, b3. So notice we're not actually taking this bishop, we're just kind of letting it chill there. d6, bishop b2. Whoops. Bishop g4. d3, bishop c5. And again, e3. So again, similar positions to what we saw before. Black takes this impudent knight. Now strong move d4. And then after ed4, knight d4, white's better. Because again, black's pawns are very weak. So material will be won pretty soon. Okay. Okay, so if white, or sorry, black just castles and ignores it. You could just continue playing e3 and knight e2, or you could even consider playing take, d3, and again you just have the two bishops. Or you can even actually play this move d4, and then after take, of course you don't take with the queen because of knight c2 forking everything, but you just play a3 first, then knight f3, and now you're just going to take this in the next move, and again, two bishops, slightly more space. So say like, you know, d6, just knight takes d4. And again, white's better. Okay. So so knight d5, bishop c5. What are you saying? Give piece e4? In which line? This line? Right, so you can't take on e4 because I take on c6. And then you're losing material. Because you move your queen, I take on e4, I play queen d5, and then I'm threatening knight e7 check, so... And also this bishop gets opened up. So yeah, you don't want to play bishop e4, but yeah. Okay, so let's go back to bishop c5. Okay, so e3. Castle. Knight e2. Okay, so if he tries something like, okay, so d6 is a normal move, but if you try something like this, trying to get knight d3 in, now d4, take, and now rather than taking this back, you play move a3. So black can take on e3 and take on f2, but you're just down a piece, and this pawn's not really a huge deal. So d3. Oh, sorry, I'm actually missing a move. Hold on a second. Sorry. Yeah, this doesn't work, but on the next move is what I was trying to say. Sorry. Okay, so what I meant was rook e8, castle. Okay, now take and knight d4. Okay, so now this doesn't work because of d4. And then again, if take a3. Okay. And again, if take, I take the knight. So now if d3, knight f4. And now if knight c2, simply rook b1 and this knight's trapped. So I just play queen takes d3, queen takes c2. So that loses. So you have to play knight a6. But simply knight takes d3, bishop b6, and b4, and this is fantastic for white. And then the other thing you can try after castle is to tuck the bishop away. So play, now that you played rook e8, to play bishop f8. So d3, take knight e7. And now notice this bishop's no longer on c5, so now we can play this move f4. Then after ef4, knight f4. And we got this open f file, more space in the center. We're going to be playing e4 in the near future. And this is good for white. Okay, so back to d6. So castle. Okay, so here he should try to keep this bishop on the board by playing a move like a6, similar to those other lines. If he plays a move like rook e8, then d4, bishop b6, and again we capture it. d5, e4, knight c3, and b4. Oops, not b3, b4. And again, more space. And the two bishops. And we have the potential to eventually play f4 if we want. We can prepare with bishop e2, etc. So to preserve the bishop pair is probably the right course. So rather than rook e8, a6, a3, bishop d7, b4. So we're playing a3 not so much to chase the bishop away, but we want to play b4 so that we can play bishop b2. So bishop a7, bishop b2. But it's nice that we gain a tempo. Rook b8, and now f4. So typical idea again, we want to open up this diagonal and start getting a kingside attack brewing. So black tries to sacrifice a pawn to stem the attack. So take, knight e7, take, and now bishop b5. So here the point is black's trying to recover this d pawn. Notice that e4 is illegal because of the bishop. And if we move this knight, we hang our rook. So there's actually two things white can try here. White actually played an exchange sacrifice in this position with knight f4. So I'll show you how that went. But if he didn't want to do that, he could also just try a4. And then if take, this move should actually win the game. Queen c4. Because again, c6, this rook is pinned, or the pawn is pinned to the rook. If the knight moves, again, take on c7. So this looks like it just wins. But he would probably play bishop d3 here instead. Rook a3, bishop c4, rook c3, b5. Okay, finally holding on to the bishop. And now knight f4 again. Because if you take on f1, rather than me taking on f1, I take on c7 first. And now this pawn is a monster on d5. And this should just be winning for white. But instead, what white tried was a immediate exchange sacrifice with knight f4, which also was quite enterprising. So knight f4, bishop takes f1, queen takes f1, and now notice he hold on to this pawn on d5. So white definitely has a lot of compensation for the exchange here. So knight g6, bishop c3, and after some more moves, targeting the c7 pawn. And here, white has some good compensation for the exchange here. His pieces are all kind of better than black's. Okay. So those are the lines where black develops the bishop, either to c5 or b4. So that's going to be part 2 of looking at English. Next, we will be looking at the reverse dragon.